Hello and welcome. I am Thomas Porteous and you're watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories. China's President Xi Jinping arrives in Cambodia to conclude a three-nation tour amid global trade tensions. Cambodia seeks increased Chinese investments as Xi promotes regional stability amid US tariffs. US Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Envoy Steve Witkoff meet European leaders in Paris to discuss Ukraine's ceasefire and Iran nuclear deal. Ukrainian officials arrive unannounced to urge tougher US stance on Russia after deadliest strike in Sumy. Italy's Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni is set to meet Trump in Washington, seeking to protect EU trade while staying in his good books. With 67 billion euros in exports at stake, she pushes for a zero-tariff deal as Rome slashes its growth forecast. US and Ukraine make significant progress towards a minerals agreement to boost economic ties and support Ukraine's recovery. Ukraine's first deputy prime minister confirms plans to sign a deal soon, marking a step forward in the bilateral partnership. Reports coming out of Gaza say that Israeli airstrikes hit displaced Palestinian camps, killing at least 25 people. The deadliest strike in Khan Yunis killed 16 and wounded 23. Other attacks in Bet Lohia and Al Mawasi killed 9 more. Trump meets Japan's trade envoy and says they're making great progress. However, Japan fails to secure immediate tariff relief as he claims over 75 countries are seeking US trade relief deals. Asian stocks edge up while the dollar firms slightly amid US-Japan trade talks and FED Chair Powell's warnings on tariff-induced slowdown. Tech shares remain under pressure following negative forecasts, with investors awaiting TSMC earnings for industry insights. Saudi Defense Minister Prince Khalid bin Salman arrives in Tehran for high-level meetings just days before critical Iran-US nuclear talks in Rome. The visit signals a potential shift in regional diplomacy as Saudi Arabia engages directly with Iran. Our top story today, Chinese President Xi Jinping has arrived in Phnom Penh, welcomed by Cambodia's King Norodom Sihamoni, capping a three-nation Southeast Asia tour aimed at boosting regional trade and ties amid tensions with the United States. Ahead of the visit, Xi published a signed article in Cambodian media calling for a shared future between China and Cambodia, highlighting centuries of friendship, economic partnerships and cultural exchange. He pledged further cooperation on infrastructure, agriculture and technology under the Belt and Road Initiative, and emphasized resistance to foreign interference and colour revolutions. Xi's trip follows stops in Vietnam and Malaysia as Beijing looks to strengthen alliances in the region and counterbalance US trade policies. We are joined by Gautam Mukherjee, senior journalist, to discuss this further. Gautam, thank you very much for joining us. Gautam, why are these Southeast Asian nations so important to Beijing right now, especially amid this ongoing Chinese and United States trade war?
Well, they're hoping, the Chinese are hoping that they will find alternate markets. The trouble is that they sell 500 billion to US alone. And all the European countries, France, Germany, etc., cannot add up to 500 billion. And the ASEAN countries, they may be able to buy something, but really it is not going to replace either the European countries on an individual basis or America, certainly. However, they are, forced to try this because the tariffs are absolutely so high, and they have taken a confrontationist attitude with America. So they've said, "Oh, we'll manage, and we are old civilization, and we'll do this." And now they're putting their money where their mouth is and hoping for the best.
Gautam, obviously China now faces the highest amount of tariffs. The only country that hasn't had that initial pause on it, Cambodia and Vietnam, are also among the highest original reciprocal tariffs, with Cambodia having 49% and Vietnam having 46%. So what does this mean as a partnership of countries that face these large tariffs from the United States in the same region? What does that say about China's growing influence in the region and what they're trying to achieve amid this trade war?
Well, earlier, when the tariffs were there but very much lower, China tried to evade them by exporting some of its manufacturing to both Vietnam and Cambodia, which is why America has placed quite high tariffs on them as well. Now, Cambodia on an individual basis has decided to drop all reciprocal tariffs against America. Vietnam is following suit. So maybe China is hoping that they will not continue to have very high tariffs on them, and the old arrangement of redirecting their exports via these two countries can continue. But if American objectives are basically to stop Chinese exports and to bring them to a conference table, then this ploy is unlikely to succeed.
Gautam, what do you think of Chinese diplomatic tactics in this? Obviously, they've remained very calm and kind of appeared like America is the aggressor. The language their foreign ministry has used when talking about this tour, obviously, the people of Cambodia, the people of Vietnam, the people of Malaysia will be very excited to see the Chinese premier. What do you think of China's tactics and their response to the United States that they've given since this trade war started?
Well, I think the Chinese are trying to find a foothold in ASEAN amongst their trading partners, erstwhile and ongoing, as well as a foothold in Europe, which is in any case suffering because of an economic downturn, high inflation, high unemployment, and so on, and have been over the years, particularly Germany, to a large extent France, and to some extent Britain. Though Britain is not EU, but it has the same problem, dependent on Chinese goods and services and raw materials, and also for China to buy their finished goods. So what is being hoped, I would imagine, by Chinese diplomacy is that they might be able to make common cause. But I think America is one jump ahead and will punish whoever from wherever makes common cause with China so that they can, if you like, break the blockade. So it's going to be interesting times ahead.
Yes.
But China is the target, and China has to come to terms with America on a direct basis.
Gautam Mukherjee, thank you very much for joining us. Very valuable insights as always. We stay in the Indo-Pacific now, where Malaysia's communication minister has said that the trade minister and second finance minister will be going to the United States at the end of this month to discuss the US tariffs imposed on the country. Minister Fahim Fadzil said this is a result of the consensus reached among ASEAN countries to jointly address the US tariff issues. Meanwhile, Taiwanese chip-making giant TSMC said on Thursday that it has not detected any change in customer behavior since US President Donald Trump announced far-reaching tariffs on global trade partners and maintained the company's forecast increase for a full year of revenue. TSMC has also announced that its next profit rose 60.3% for the first 3 months of 2025. On the other hand, Chinese online retail giants Shein and Temu have warned that US customers that goods will get pricier from next week, that after President Donald Trump imposed hefty tariffs on goods from the Chinese. The companies have said they have seen the operating expenses rise due to recent changes in global trade rules and tariffs, adding they will make price adjustments from the 25th of April. This comes after Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell warned of the risk of slowing growth and rising prices due to tariffs on Wednesday, as uncertainty around US trade policies kept the dollar rooted near 3-year lows. US financial markets fell following Jerome Powell's remarks, with all 3 major Wall Street indices ending in the same day as in the red as investors dumped tech stocks. Powell has stated that this could put the Federal Reserve in the inevitable position of having to choose between tackling inflation and unemployment. Let's take a look at what he said.
The data we have in hand so far suggests that growth has slowed in the first quarter of this year from last year's solid pace. Despite strong motor vehicle sales, overall consumer spending appears to have grown modestly. In addition, strong imports during the first quarter, reflecting attempts by businesses to get ahead of potential tariffs, are expected to weigh on GDP growth. The administration is, as I mentioned in my remarks, is implementing significant policy changes, and particularly trade now is the focus. And the effects of that are likely to move us away from our goals. So unemployment is likely to go up as the economy slows in all likelihood, and inflation is likely to go up as tariffs find their way, and some part of those tariffs come to be paid by the public.
After the Japan-US tariff talks began in Washington, Finance Minister voiced concern over recent volatile market moves triggered by Trump's tariff announcements, saying they could hurt Japan's economic recovery. He said that they are deeply concerned that this could affect the global economy through various routes such as trade and financial markets. Cato plans to go to Washington next week for meetings of International Monetary Fund and the Group of 20. He stated that he will closely communicate with the US on currency issues, adding Tokyo and Washington have long agreed that excessive volatility and disorderly moves in currency rates are undesirable. This comes after Japan failed on Wednesday to secure any immediate relief from US tariffs, with Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba saying after his envoy held talks in Washington that future negotiations won't be easy. However, he also stated that Trump has expressed his desire to give the negotiations with Japan the highest priority. The Prime Minister called Akazawa's discussions in Washington frank and constructive, though he noted that there is a gap between Japan and the US when it comes to this. Let's take a look at what Japan Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba had to say.
中澤大臣からは日米協議の場でアメリカの関税措置は極めて遺憾であるということを述べ、我が国の産業や日米両国における投資、雇用の拡大に与える影響などについて、我が国の考えを説明をした上で、アメリカによる一連の関税措置の見直しを強く申し入れたと。でもちろん今後とも容易な協議とはなりませんが、トランプ大統領は日本との協議を最優先としたいと、このように述べておられます。今回、次につながる協議が行われたと、このように認識をし、これを評価をいたしておるところでございます。
The Japanese Prime Minister has also said that he has decided that the talks will continue at the ministerial level and that he will visit the United States himself at the most appropriate time to directly meet with President Trump. Trump has said on his social media platform Truth Social after meeting Akazawa that the two men had made big progress. Let's move over to Europe, where high-stakes talks on the Russia-Ukraine war are set to begin in Paris, with key American and European officials gathering to push for a possible ceasefire. President Donald Trump's special envoy Steve Witkoff and Secretary of State Marco Rubio will join counterparts from France, Germany and the United Kingdom for what's being called the most significant transatlantic engagement on Ukraine in months. Ukraine's foreign minister and defense minister have already arrived in Paris, accompanied by President Zelensky's chief of staff, Andrei Yarmyk, who confirmed that they will be meeting with the United States and European representatives to discuss security and peace. European diplomats are expected to press the US to turn up the heat on Moscow, calling for more direct pressure to secure a ceasefire. This comes just days after a Russian strike on the city of Sumy killed 35 and injured hundreds. This meeting also follows Witkoff's latest talks with Russian President Vladimir Putin, where he claimed that the Kremlin leader is open to permanent peace. President Trump has pledged to end the war quickly. However, his push for a ceasefire has yet to produce concrete results. We are joined by Dr. Sergei Dvoryanov, President of the IDC Russia and Director of the WHD International Board, live from Moscow. Thank you very much for joining us, Dr. Dvoryanov. So these are said to be the most significant transatlantic talks on the Ukraine war for months. What do you make of the negotiations of Marco Rubio and US envoy Steve Witkoff in these matters, and what are your expectations from Paris, Dr. Dvoryanov?
Thank you so much. Good afternoon. And I can see that right now it's a lot of challengers in front of the European politicians and the American government as well. We can see that Donald Trump is in very complicated position right now because he has his own opposition, like Joe Biden start to blame him, and he's in deep conflict with the European Union and also big challengers, Asia and China, and his issue with Mexico. Same thing with European politicians. We can see that our modern world is a lot of conflicts. That's why I can see that only one way to solve all this problem, we should prepare some strategy of win-win movement when we can when we can completely break down stereotypes and open for dialogue. First of all, of course, our expectation of Russian Federation that peace should exist on the condition where Ukraine never and ever will join to NATO Union, because it's very clear our position, very strong position of our national leader, that it should be denazification of Ukraine,
yes.
Legal law about possibility to Russian language. And this condition is completely not acceptable, unfortunately, for European politicians. That's why, of course, they should break down stereotypes and make Ukraine a neutral country. As simple as this.
Dr. Dvoryanov, it's hard to talk about this conflict with obviously not mentioning the strike in Sumy a few days ago where 35 civilians were killed. If incidents carry on like that and these talks are ongoing with President Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump and their diplomats, do they think that the Russian way of warfare is going to affect these talks and the Russian-US relationship long term?
See, during the war, of course, we can expect a lot of losses. in Sumy region during the Russian attack. It's not only civilians was died, it was the soldiers, which was confirmed from the Ukrainian side. And there was a main aim, main target of Russian attack, not civilians, of course. And we can see some kind of some historical events which can change the policy and can change the history. For example, during the election, Donald Trump was very close to be killed. If he will be killed, of course, it will be completely change the picture of the modern history. But this one particular case with the Sumy, it's not can change the whole picture of deep conflict between Russia and Ukraine. It's just only one small case, which again improved that we should negotiate with peace on the acceptable conditions of both sides. It's very easy. We should negotiate.
Yes.
We should make Ukraine neutral country. Of course,
Okay.
we should definitely make some denazification of this country. Yes, and join historical regions which already belong to Russian Federation.
Yes. Dr. Dvoryanov, thank you very much for joining us. We move on to more news. Russian President Vladimir Putin will host Qatar's Emir Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani in Moscow today to discuss global and regional issues, with a key focus on the war in Ukraine. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov confirmed both leaders will exchange views on Ukraine and other regional conflicts. The talks will also cover trade, energy, particularly LNG, and mediation efforts in Syria, Gaza and Iran. Qatar has played a key role in facilitating humanitarian actions, including reuniting children separated during the war in Ukraine. Qatari Minister of State for Foreign Affairs Mohammed Al-Kulfani emphasised the importance of ongoing dialogue in stabilising energy markets and supporting the global economy amid the Ukraine conflict's impact on supply chains. The Kremlin praised Qatar's role as a trusted mediator and valued its confidential discussions on sensitive global matters. We stay in the Middle East now, where Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi has arrived in Moscow to deliver a personal message from Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei to Russian President Vladimir Putin, according to Iranian state media. The trip to Moscow signals Tehran's effort to bolster diplomatic backing from Russia as American pressure mounts. Meanwhile, Iran has confirmed that the next round of nuclear talks with the United States will take place in Rome on Saturday, after earlier confusion about the location. These talks come amid rising tensions over Iran's advanced uranium enrichment. This announcement on Iranian state TV followed the resignation of a top Iranian negotiator, Mohammad Javad Zarif. The talks in Rome will be mediated by Oman, who also facilitated the last round in Muscat. These negotiations come amid soaring tensions between the US and Iran over the latter's nuclear development. Trump has repeatedly threatened to unleash airstrikes targeting Iran's nuclear program if a deal isn't reached. These discussions could be crucial to averting a major escalation in the region as Iran's nuclear program continues to push towards weapons-grade levels. Let's move over to North America now, where Canada's four main federal party leaders had a face-off in a heated French language debate, clashing over US President Donald Trump's trade war, housing and energy. Liberal leader and Prime Minister Mark Carney, slightly ahead in the polls, struggled with French and repeated attacks, tying him to Justin Trudeau's legacy. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre accused the Liberals of weakening Canada's economy, while the NDP's Jagmeet Singh targeted both Carney and Poilievre over tax policy. Bloc Québécois Yves François Blanchet questioned Carney's leadership, saying a new face doesn't mean a new philosophy. Trump loomed large as tariffs and comments about Canada becoming the 51st US state dominated early on in the debate. Leaders also discussed boosting oil production and managing the housing crisis. The Green Party was barred from participating after failing to meet the debate criteria. An English debate follows on Thursday. Canadians vote on April the 28th. Here's what the candidates have said.
The difference, one of the differences, there are many, but one of the differences between the two of us goes to the question I was just asked, which is I put much more emphasis on the economy, on growing the economy. In fact, in this circumstance that we're in, given the scale of the crisis and what needs to be done, I would say a relentless focus on growing the economy to work for all Canadians.
Aujourd'hui, j'ai hâte de présenter ma vision de comment je vais me battre pour les gens, pas pour les PDG, pas pour les milliardaires, mais pour monsieur, madame, tout le monde. Et aussi un message important. Go, Abs, go!
We move to the Middle East next, and the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia have been accused of being involved in a recent land offensive in Yemen. However, the UAE denies these claims. UAE Assistant Minister Lana Neshabah calls the reports wild, unsubstantiated stories and labelled them misleading news of the week. Additionally, the Wall Street Journal reported that Yemeni factions are allegedly planning a ground offensive along the Red Sea coast, possibly with support from US airstrikes against the Houthis. These strikes, which have been ongoing for a month, have focused on targeting Houthi military assets. Despite these tensions, Saudi Arabia's previous shift towards peace talks in 2022 raises questions about future involvement. With the ongoing US military operations and the Houthis' persistent threats to maritime security, the stakes are high. Moving on now, Russian President Vladimir Putin met with Russian nationals freed from captivity in Gaza following the October 2023 Hamas attacks on Israel. In a statement, Putin talked about Russia's long-standing diplomatic relations with Palestinians were key to securing their release. During the meeting, Putin spoke with Alexander Truvanov, who was held hostage for nearly 500 days. Putin thanked Hamas for their role in facilitating the humanitarian release. Let's take a listen in to what he said.
Я думаю, нужно выразить слова благодарности руководству, политическому руководству Хамас за то, что они.
Truvanov, who was joined by his family, thanked Putin for his efforts and called for the continued release of all remaining hostages, referring to them as brothers. Putin reassured that Russia would continue to do everything possible to ensure the safe return of those still in captivity. We move over to the United States once again, where Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni has met with President Donald Trump at the White House ahead of her meeting to ease tensions over US tariffs on European goods and position herself as a bridge between Washington and Brussels. Reports suggest that Meloni is walking a tightrope between her ideological affinity to the US president and her ties with European allies who have criticised Trump's tariff hikes and his decision to exclude the EU from talks with Russia to end the war in Ukraine. Since Trump's trade war with the bloc began, Meloni has urged Brussels not to retaliate and has looked to maintain ties with the US leader. However, previously she had also criticised his 20% duties on exports from the European Union as wrong. According to reports, there is a possibility that Meloni could end up in a trap similar to the White House meeting in February with Ukrainian leader Volodymyr Zelensky, in which Trump and his Vice President J.D. Vance berated his guests in front of reporters. Well, that's all we have time for. We will continue to bring you more news updates from around the world.